Thanks for joining us today to discuss life and godliness with Rick and Angela Carter. If you'd like to be part of the conversation, email us at cartersforhope@gmail.com. That's Carters, the number 4, hope@gmail.com. Any questions you have, we'll discuss in future episodes. Right now, sit back and let's join in on the conversation. Good morning.
Good morning.
We are here in Somerville, Missouri, and we're having a good time this week. And
Yep.
it is rainy today.
Because you know what Missouri's known for? Rain.
Rain. So
Terrible.
you might hear a little bit of rain, but we'll I think we'll be fine. For
We're pretty loud. We'll probably drown it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, our topic today was chosen by a poll, actually our next 3 topics. And so our number 1 vote getter was
boundaries and family.
Boundaries and family. And so we're going to just talk about different relationships within the family and ideas about boundaries regarding those different ages, as well as, extended family. We'll get to that kind of toward the end of the conversation. We're going to start early in the conversation with where family begins, which is marriage.
Yes.
And so when you get married, what boundaries should there be between a husband and a wife? What boundaries should be set? Boundaries. What do you think?
Between a husband and a wife?
I think there has to be a boundary where she does all the dishes and he isn't allowed to do dishes.
Wow. No, I don't think
You don't like that one?
Boundary. No.
How about where she's not allowed to touch his guns and knives?
Wow.
That's a boundary. No?
No.
Okay, go ahead. Tell me.
I don't know that I really, because we're one. So when you're one, you have access to all. So I don't see a level of boundary in that.
It's interesting because we do hear things like this where well, she should be allowed to have her own bank account and her own, email and all these type of things. But there is the other extreme where there's no allowance she's not allowed to have us email or a phone, or we share everything. Everything must be. And I think there's a balance.
Extremes.
Yeah, I think there's a balance between controlling behavior and behavior that is, I don't want you to be able to see anything because, I have to have a boundary. I think there's this balance somewhere between there, right?
Yes, I agree.
So for us, Angela has her own phone and email and, all that type of stuff, but I do too. And here's the thing.
Here, you know the code.
Right. We share the code, actually. The email, I log onto her computer here. She logs onto mine. She logs onto mine when she remembers the code, and I have to keep telling it to her because she doesn't remember it. But
I remember it now.
Anyway, but that's the thing is that there's openness. The idea of boundaries in marriage can be somewhat odd in that they're intended to create distance. Boundaries create distance. Boundaries say you can't go beyond this place. But then it's strange to me that someone would say, I want you just to be fully open with me and completely honest. I don't want anything to be between us. And don't look at my phone. Don't look at my email. Don't look at this. Don't look at that, because now you're invading my privacy. It's like, well, is there privacy in a marriage? I mean, you're to be, as the Bible says, they were both naked and were not ashamed. So there should be nothing in the marriage that can't be seen and exposed that would cause shame. There should be nothing
Absolutely.
like that.
So before you're married, you're single. You have your boundaries,
All right.
Then you get married and you become what? See the boundary?
That's awesome.
Sorry.
I love the hand.
I'm a visual person. So now your boundaries are collided. You don't have your own.
Okay, but the boundaries become not within the marriage, but around the marriage.
Yes, yeah.
And I think that that's an important part, because you do have to protect your marriage from those that would be trying to invade it. There are friends who want to interject themselves into your relationship. They shouldn't be allowed to. There are parents sometimes who want to interject themselves into your relationship. That shouldn't be allowed. And by the way, um, as someone who pastored for 25 years, it's not my job to interject myself into the marriage of people in my church. If they ask for counsel, I'm ready to give it to them, but I'm not going to interject myself in there without them being, they're an invitation. Hey, would you help us with X, Y, or Z? It's not
Mhm.
my job to just unilaterally go around and poke my nose in. And I think that sometimes there's a danger in that because sometimes preachers do get this idea that they have a right to control families and control people in the church and tell everyone how they're going to do things at their own home or those type of things. And that's not the place of a pastor. He is to preach the word. He's to give the truth, but it's the family's responsibility to receive and apply it. And so I think that that is a boundary, but it's a boundary around the home, not within the home.
Right.
And I think that that's kind of an important aspect. Now, so that's within the marriage side of it, but then the other side of that is okay, you start having kids and you do have to teach your children how to set protective boundaries in their life from
Sure.
those that would hurt them and influence them. But I think once again, the problem comes when the idea is that my boundaries are to
Keep
protect me
you from
from
me.
my parent.
Yeah.
And that's not an okay boundary. There's nothing in the Bible that would indicate that. Now, once they become an adult, that's a different question. We'll talk about that in a moment. But within the home, when they're children, the parent is the guardian of the boundaries, not the one outside of the boundaries.
Right, not the child. And but now, because we had boys and girls, we had to teach boundaries between the
Well,
boys and
certainly,
girls.
but that's the
Yes,
parent imposing a protective
yes.
boundary and teaching
But
what,
the
but that's you're
children
teaching them how to set boundaries in
yeah,
that fashion.
but the children were never in our home, were never allowed to say, "This is my room, you cannot come in here."
Well, that happened one time. It was said one time, and then I don't know what happened to the door at that point, but it was gone, right?
It
Because
never happened again.
no, it didn't happen again. But that's the reality is that kids do there's a natural desire to set boundaries, and there's nothing wrong with that natural desire because it is an important thing for protection outside of the home. But we have to understand where within the home that boundaries are around the home, not against the home,
Sure.
right? So the kids have to learn boundaries with each other, boys versus girls, right? And boundaries in the sense of personal space, okay, and personal protection. I do think it's important to teach your young children the boundary of intimacy, and no one's allowed to touch my private parts. We'll just say it that
Mhm.
way. And I don't think that private parts is the term that ought to be used. I think that there are different philosophies on what to use terms, but I think that there needs to be distinct terms and and in a way that if someone did violate your child, they can express it in a clear way, right? And
Right.
not
And you would
and
understand
you
what
would
they were saying.
understand and know what they're saying.
Mhm.
Um, but at the same time, that the point of boundaries is to protect them from that. But within the context of the home, also you have to give a clarity of what needs to be protected. And so you have boundaries, but not in the sense of the children get to set their boundaries against the parents, but the parents are helping the children learn how to set boundaries for protection in that environment. And I know that there are some times where parents are abusers themselves. And so there are extremes, and someone might say, oh, well, what about when parents abuse? Well,
We're
okay,
not
that's the
talking about
extreme. We're
extremes,
talking
yeah.
about the normal. The normal way God intended things to
Mm,
be is the parent is a protector, not a predator. And so in that normal environment, a parent is helping the child learn how to set boundaries. So
mhm.
setting boundaries, hey, don't allow people to touch you in these fashions and stuff.
And, when the kids were little, I'm saying like toddlers, because ours were all very close, they played together all the time. As they got older and their bodies started changing, maturing, we began to teach the boys, you can't wrestle your sisters. That's not appropriate play with your
Right.
sisters. And vice versa, the girls, look, you can't walk around in your pajamas in the house. There's boys in the house. You've got to be clothed, those kind of things. Protecting them, teaching them these are appropriate boundaries within the family because of
And even though you're family members, that doesn't mean I mean, a husband and a wife are to have nothing between them as far as the nakedness of themselves within the husband wife marriage relationship. But brothers and sisters ought to.
Yeah, absolutely.
There should be that barrier there.
So we had to help them learn the boundaries between boys and girls in all
Yeah.
aspects, even in the home as far as playing and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and then you also learn the boundaries of possessions. Like there are shared things that have to be shared, and then there are private things that are not have don't have to be shared. It's good that they have some things that are theirs alone, and also that they have things that are community property, I guess, in some
Mhm.
ways. They learn how to respect the things that don't belong exclusively to them, that they learn that it's not okay to tear up things that belong to others, that it's not okay to destroy things that belong to the whole family, just because they don't belong to them, and those type of things. There's
Mhm.
some people that never learn that, and then they're destructive in society, and they're bad neighbors.
Right.
And so that's part of teaching your children. Some of those boundaries teach you to be good neighbors.
Yeah.
Some of those boundaries teach you to be protect what belongs to you, but also be mindful of protecting what belongs to everyone. So, there's different aspects of boundaries like
Right.
that. What you're
Sorry, I was
laughing?
just thinking about the kids and growing up in different instances. Anyway.
Nothing you can share, I'm guessing. Okay. All right.
Well, I was thinking about as far bound because you were talking about boundary and property and all of that, but there's also boundary in words. Like there's just certain things that the girls shouldn't share with the boys, and vice versa. The boys share with the
Correct.
girls. So
Yes.
you're teaching them while you're teaching them boundaries, you're also teaching them discretion and in
And that's not to say we hid biology from our kids, because we
no.
certainly didn't. When they were old enough to comprehend biology, we explained biology to them, not as a group, but individually.
Mhm.
We were very open to teaching our children so that there wasn't a space for Satan to come in and create confusion,
Right.
right? So, but at the same time, that's not a conversation they should have with each other per se. It was a conversation of personal training and
Right.
that. And so, yeah, so there's a lot of that aspect. But the idea nowadays where my child has their own cell phone and I don't have a right to look at their cell phone, or I don't have a right to go into their room, or I don't have a right to open a drawer, that's their private boundary. That's baloney,
Yeah.
in my opinion. And
Absolutely.
it's dangerous because Satan loves to be able to hide things.
Yes.
And so for our kids, they knew that when it come to mom and dad, there wasn't a boundary that was, if we felt like there was a danger, there wasn't a boundary that we were bound by. It was our job to put boundaries around them, not to be bound from them. Now, that's not to say we didn't let them have space of their own. But if there was a concern, we sat and said, look, here's the thing. We allow you to have this space so you learn to have space. But at the same time, we have a right to come into this space if we are concerned,
Right.
and we are concerned, and here's why. And so, there's kind of a balance in that,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. And thankfully, our kids, like we said, they tried that once. One of
Yeah.
them tried it once, and but the others, they just knew that that
Well,
was
after you only have to see something once to know that
mhm,
that's not how it's going to work, right? So,
right. But we didn't, and like you said, we didn't go in there like we didn't lord it over them every single day. This
no.
is our house. We can go into your room
No,
anytime we
it
want.
wasn't it wasn't a power play.
No,
It was a protection.
but we were diligent to observe our children all the time and watch the attitude changes, watch the word changes, and if there was something that threw up red flags, then let's go check it out. Let's go see what's
Right.
going on. Is there something we need to know about? Is there something we missed? Is there something we need to talk to them about?
But it also is imperative in that regard that you have a constant conversation, communication with your kids, that
Yes.
that you're not ignoring them and letting them. One of the things I think is just really destructive is the idea that children, especially teenagers, are allowed to just spend all of their time in their room and not be around the family. That was never an okay thing in our
No.
home either. I don't believe that it should ever be. But part of the problem is parents going off on their own, isolating
Mhm.
themselves. A family ought to be together. A family ought to be around each other. I think
Mhm.
that's the Deuteronomy 6 model. You know, They need to be able to see when you're sitting in your house and when you're rising up and lying down and walking in the wayside and all that type of stuff. And the focal point of everything we do is to teach them to love God, and so they need to see that in all aspects of life. And if I'm isolating myself from them, they're not seeing that. And if I allow them to isolate themselves from me, they're not seeing that. And Satan loves to isolate children who don't have discernment yet, who don't have discretion to know how to protect themselves. And I'm not saying they should never be allowed to be alone. I'm saying that as a regular daily practice is
It's
negative. It's
dangerous.
a
Yeah.
dangerous thing,
Yeah.
I believe. So that has to be taken into account on that regard.
And I think one of the things that I loved that we did was we helped the children feel like they were a productive part of the family. And because they felt that way, they came and talked to us about everything.
Yeah, and
There wasn't a boundary in our communication because we removed that boundary and told them, you can come tell us anything, even if you've messed up.
yeah, and I'm sure there are things that we don't know.
Oh,
Okay,
absolutely.
but I don't think they're
There's many.
extensive.
I don't think there's many.
Most of them are more humorous when we find out about something we didn't know. It's like, "Oh, that was funny."
Yeah.
But the problem is when it becomes like that's the norm,
Mhm.
and that shouldn't be the norm.
Right. And even when they messed up, we told them, if you come and it's better if you come and confess it than we find out later. And
Yeah, I think you deal with things differently when it's confessed than when it's discovered,
yeah.
right? And that was part of our family practice.
Mhm.
So then boundaries beyond the family, though, as far as boundaries to protect the family. So we've talked about boundaries within the family, but most boundaries, the great majority of boundaries are not in the home, but they're around the home. And so let's talk about that for a few minutes. Then what kind of boundaries do you set did we set that are designed for the protection of the home? Like, for instance, when your kids were little, our kids were little, we taught them don't talk to strangers. And, there's a boundary there that, you're protecting. It's not that you think every stranger is evil, but at the same time, you don't know strangers. So until you can discern whether they're safe or not, there has to be a boundary. I think of a funny story with Eternity,
Eternity.
our oldest. She was sitting we were in the grocery store, and we were looking at something. I don't know if we were comparing prices or trying to figure out which thing we wanted, and we had told her, she was just 3, I think, and we had taught her, don't talk to strangers. And so all of a sudden we hear her talking, and then we hear a man's voice, and we turn around, and there's this, like, adult man standing there talking to our 3-year-old, and we were like, excuse us. And we grabbed the cart and we just left and got around the corner. And we said, Eternity, we told you. And this was partly because we had just had this conversation earlier in the day, or, the days leading up. And so I said, we told you not to talk to strangers. And she goes, he wasn't a stranger. I told him my name. And so it's
Obviously.
like, okay, concept here. But that teaching boundaries of, okay, stranger danger kind of thing,
Mhm.
and yet still teaching them to be friendly, right? So there's a
Right.
balance there. So what kind of boundaries early on was don't talk to strangers? What?
We had boundaries of who we would let the kids stay overnight with.
Which was, to be honest, no one.
Exactly.
And you say, that's just not right. But the thing is we did let them stay at my parents' house if no one else was staying with them.
Right.
And that was basically it for a long, long time. We allowed people to stay at our house, certain people, not everybody, but we were
We let
very
them
cautious.
go.
We didn't let them stay with other people. You say, well, that just doesn't seem, that's a double standard. You can call it whatever you want. I was protecting my kids. I don't care what people try and, like double standard or whatever. I don't care what you say about it. I'm protecting my children.
And we explained to our
And
kids why we didn't.
the thing is I've counseled too many people who were molested or abused staying at a friend's house
Or a cousin's
and a
house.
cousin's
Or a
house
family
and
member's house.
yeah. So there has to be boundaries, and that's not that I think everyone's an abuser. Someone said this to me one time, you lock your door to keep honest people honest, right? It's
Yep.
not that you accuse everyone of being a thief, but you lock the door so that an honest man comes along, he tries to open the door for some reason, he goes, "Oh, that door's closed," and he moves on, right? A thief is gonna try and break through.
Right.
But that doesn't mean if you say, "Well, I don't think a thief will come," that doesn't mean you don't lock your door.
Right.
So, you have to put protections there and, you might have different positions on that. I have the position because I counsel so many people that were abused. And there's a significant amount of that that takes place amongst even extended family. Matter of
Mhm.
fact, a lot of it takes place amongst extended family and friends. Nope, sorry, there's a boundary.
Not
It's
gonna
not
not
gonna
gonna
not gonna
happen.
happen with my kids. And it didn't, praise God. So you can complain about it, but it worked, right? So okay, so there's definitely
Sleepovers,
where the
yeah.
sleepovers and all that are
We had
were
boundaries with,
boundaries.
what kids they got to go hang out with as teenagers.
Yeah, Friends. I got to have the final veto on Friends
Mhm.
and me and Angela, I
Yeah.
guess. And so, yeah, absolutely. Okay. What other boundaries?
Activities they got to participate in.
And yeah, how far those activities went,
Mhm.
when those activities were,
Mhm.
those were boundaries. They didn't get to interfere with God. They didn't get to interfere with our family.
When they still lived at home, we had boundaries with what jobs they could work.
That's true. No job that would take them away from church.
Yep.
There were adjustments with as far as family functions for a job, but not
No
church functions.
Yeah, no jobs that served alcohol or,
Right.
cigarettes or anything like that.
Correct.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. And then, so there were boundaries like that all along the way. And then, of course, when courtship began,
Mhm.
there were boundaries
Yep.
as far as, you're not
You're not gonna be
alone
alone.
together,
Yeah.
chaperones and
Mhm.
so forth. And even in conversation early on, no private conversation until they were already engaged
Yeah.
and,
So
into that place.
we would set up a group, text with their now spouses, but then their person they were courting and their mom and dad and our child and us.
Yeah. And we didn't interject in the group text, but we
No,
were
it
there.
was just so that we could have oversight.
Right. But there was a point in their engagement when they were fully engaged and they were coming to that, with that direction of marriage where we did allow them to have private conversation.
Yes.
But so it wasn't like until the day of their wedding, but they still, until the day of their wedding, they weren't to be completely alone. Now they could sit in church by themselves and talk privately,
Mhm.
but
And we
putting
allowed
themselves in
them
that
to
situation.
call each other in the courtship stage before engagement. We allowed them to call, but they couldn't talk to them after, I think it was like 9 o'clock in their bedroom. Like all
Alone.
communication had to
Yeah.
be out in open
Yeah.
areas,
And again, some might say that's, you know, so, overbearing or something like that. But
Well, they weren't tempted to talk about inappropriate things because they were sitting in the living room with
right.
us.
And you do you, boo. I mean,
Yeah.
we were protecting our kids. Again, I think sometimes people don't understand. I counsel a lot of people and there's a lot of bad stuff that happens that people later end up regretting and cause marriage problems.
Yeah.
And I can tell you this, none of our kids are hindered in their relationship with their spouse because of how we did things.
No.
They have very close and good relationships with their spouse. And so, that's just the way that
Yep.
worked out. But it was boundaries that
That
we
we
put
set.
in
Yeah.
there to try and protect them. The boundaries are for the point of
And that's
protection,
what
right?
we told them, and that's what we taught them, and we never stopped teaching that. We never stopped reiterating that through every stage of their childhood. Look, I know you don't fully understand why we won't let you do this, but it is for your protection. I don't know how many times we said that, all the way up until they were engaged. And
Yeah.
even after they were engaged, look, we were just trying to protect you. We love you so much that we wanted to protect you.
So let's talk then now about boundaries beyond marriage because those changed. When our kids got married, we told them, you now are the protector of your home and we won't invade your boundaries,
No.
right? So we don't come and tell them just our opinion about everything they do or don't do
And that is the hardest thing. I'm not
for
lying.
her.
That's the hardest thing because we do counsel so much. And so sometimes it's like you see things and you know why you had your rules and protections and boundaries in place when they were little, and you see them not be as strong in some areas like you were, and you're
Yeah,
just like,
but I don't think it's like yeah, I don't think it's like
"It's not bad,"
yeah,
like, they're
no,
not being
no, no,
bad,
no,
but
no.
it's just and
Just, they have they set their own boundaries, and
Yeah.
that's the right thing. They know how
Yes.
to set boundaries,
Yes.
and they may find that they need to raise the boundary level
Right.
or whatever,
Or,
and it may
yeah.
not be a problem for them in that setting. But the thing is that now the boundary is that they are their own family,
I know.
and they make those
And
decisions,
mommy has to keep her mouth closed.
and daddy enforces that.
Yes. Unless they ask.
If they ask, that's different.
Yeah.
They're asking for input, and
Yeah.
that's not the same thing as I mean, when you open the door, that's a different question. So,
Yeah.
but for the most part, it's now okay, they're setting their boundaries, so we don't invade them. Now, like for instance, Jeshua and Kiska lived 3 doors away from us when we were still lived I had a home in Oklahoma City. And
Mm.
they bought the house. They came to us and said, "We'd like to buy this house, but, we do have a little concern that we're gonna live so close to you." I said, "I will never come over we will never come over to your house without being invited or asking first." And we didn't.
Nope.
We would text them, "Hey, are you home? Do you have time to talk, or do you wanna come over?" Even,
Mhm.
we did not impose on them in any fashion. They were able to have their own family, their own home, and,
Mhm.
and it was great. We had a great relationship because boundaries do make good relationships,
Yes.
right, in
Yeah.
that sense. And I'm talking about outside of the marriage, outside of the home, those boundaries help give guidance to a relationship.
Yeah. I enjoyed living by them. We weren't over there all the time. I mean, we could probably count on one hand the number of times went to their house the whole time we lived next door to each
Well,
other.
it wouldn't be one hand, but
But we always had an open
it was
door
more than that.
policy with all of our kids.
You can
You could
come,
always come
but
over.
they didn't just walk in.
No, they knocked, but I'm just saying, but they came over quite often, because we loved being around each other and fellowshipping with each other and those things. But it wasn't like I was always looking out the door,
Are they
what are
home?
Joshua and
What are
Kiska
they
doing,
doing? No,
No, it was like that's their family when they have time, and I know they had people over, friends over and things like that.
that was their business.
Yeah, so but it was like we had our life, they have their life, and when they wanna come over, that's awesome.
Right,
If we wanna go visit, we'll go over there,
right.
but
But those were interestingly, those are boundaries we put there for them because we understood the necessity of those boundaries, right?
Yep.
It wasn't like they imposed boundaries on us. And I think sometimes that's where boundaries get confusing is when you are trying to invade someone else's space and they have to say you're not allowed to do that. And so then if I'm having to impose boundaries sometimes with extended family or whatever, it's because they're trying to do things that are beyond what would be acceptable to another family. I mean, you're
Right.
not married, you're not in our home. Respect the distinction,
Mhm.
right? And so that kind of is a no-brainer, right?
Right.
I don't have a right to look at any of my kids' phone now.
No.
They're not in my home. I don't have a right to just go in their house and walk into their room and those things. No, I don't have that right because they're their own family. And that distinction is, I think, the clarity there.
Mhm.
And so that goes for all extended family now.
Yep.
So our kids, even though they're our kids, they are now our extended family.
And if they let me watch the grandkids, it's my responsibility to operate within their boundaries,
Correct.
not mine.
Now, if I can't do that, then I need to be honest about that and
Yeah.
say, I can't watch them if you're going to put this restriction. Like if for some reason our kid said, I want you to watch my kids, but you can't take them to church when you go to church, then I'm sorry, I can't watch the kids.
Then we drop them off on Saturday.
We'll have to drop them off because,
Yeah.
that boundary would be imposing on me. You're trying to now control me and you don't have a right to control me either.
Right.
And so, there's where a boundary breakdown would
Mhm.
be. I think that friends have to have boundaries in the same fashion. I think a lot of it is just respecting people in
I
that
agree.
fashion,
I
right?
agree.
It's respecting, and I respect my kids as I would respect other people. I wouldn't just walk into someone else's house. I'm not going to just walk into my kids' house. They're their own family.
Mhm.
I wouldn't grab someone else's phone and just start scrolling on it. I wouldn't do that with my kids. I wouldn't do that with my parents. They're their own family. See, there's openness within the bonds here because this is where the boundary is. And outside of this, every boundary I would want others to respect for me, I need to respect for them. I think
Right.
that is the context of all the concept of boundaries in that.
Yep. No,
So
absolutely.
there you go. We've solved it all.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, what about though, and I mentioned this earlier, boundaries in the church, because I do think that sometimes preachers see things that are problems, but have to hold back being like giving that counsel and direction until it's requested. Right. Kind of as a parent who's got married kids, sometimes you see things you might think are a problem, but it's not your place to just impose your counsel and such on your kids. You have to hold back until they request it. As a pastor, it's similar. And you are watching for people's souls, but at the same time, you have to respect their home and not impose. And I don't see this a lot, to be honest. I think you hear about it more than you see it. Um,
I think
and
people blow it out of proportion more than you actually see
yeah,
it.
I think when it's present, it's not blown out of proportion. But I think that it doesn't happen for most people. They've
Right.
just heard that it has happened,
Yeah.
and it has happened. I'm not saying
No,
it
I'm not
hasn't,
saying it hasn't.
but at the same time, every time the preacher gets up and gives a message doesn't mean he's invading your business in your home. He is to preach the whole counsel of God, right?
Right.
Now, if he gets up and says, hey, if you in your home do X, Y, and Z, then you're not allowed to be a member of the church. As far as, if in your home you have a television, I've heard that before. If you had a television, you're not allowed to be a member of the church. Well, that's an extra biblical position in that regard. The Bible doesn't specifically talk about that. But it would be different if it were, let's say, our church covenant says that if you're engaged in drinking and drugs and so forth, that you're subject to removal from membership, and you're publicly doing that. Well, that's a different scenario.
Right.
If the preacher gets up and preaches against watching pornography, say he has no right to tell us what we can and can't watch in our home. Well, that's a different scenario because you're engaged in what the Bible specifically calls out in a sinful fashion. But then to say the preacher gets to decide what kind of car you drive,
No, that's crazy.
or the preacher gets to decide where you go on vacation or what home you buy.
Or how much money you give to the church, or
Right. Well, I mean, there's the biblical
the
standard
tithe.
of tithing
Yes.
and so forth. But beyond that,
because actually
And
we've
I
heard
don't
about
even-
that recently, where a preacher goes and looks at the family's finances and says, "Okay, this is your tithe, and this is how much you're going to give."
Not in a biblical church, though.
No, and you're going to give this much to missions, or you're going to give this much to building.
Yeah, and that was not in a church that would be biblically, but it happens. And then people say, "Oh, the preacher preached on tithing. He's invading our personal boundaries and such." And that's not the same thing, right?
Right.
For me to preach that God says this, be honest with God. Preaching it is one thing, but going into someone's home and going through their books is an invasion of privacy, right?
That is mind blowing.
Yeah. So, and preaching on the Bible has this standard, one thing, but then going in the home and going through their drawers, that's a different standard. When you start getting into, you should buy X car, or you should live in X house, or you should work X job, that's not something a preacher has a right to impose on others. So he's gone beyond the boundary that God has for him.
Yeah.
So a pastor has to have that comprehension as well of boundaries, but at the same time, just because he preaches, and if it's biblical, and he preaches on something, then that's not usurping the boundary he has. That's the responsibility he has.
Right. But then also it goes the other way. The church does not have the right to invade the pastor's
That's 100% true.
family's boundaries.
Correct. It's nobody's business in the church, the pastor's dealing with his children, unless it's criminally, if he was being abusive, that'd be one thing. But as far as telling the preacher's kids how they're supposed to behave and correcting them as if you had a right to do that, you don't have the right to do that. That's their business.
Right.
That's their boundary, right? Or telling the preacher what kind of vehicle is okay for him to drive. And I know it sounds dumb, but I've heard that more often than the other, to be honest.
Yes.
More often than I've heard of preachers who have invaded people's place. And I have heard of that. All right. I've known people that happened to. Okay. But more often than that, I know of preachers who have been told, "You're not allowed to have that kind of a car. You're not allowed to have that kind of a house because you
You have
can't
to
live
look
at this
poor.
standard.
You
You
have to
need
do
to,
this.
yeah, you need to make sacrifices. Your family ought to be sacrificing." And that is very, very common.
Mhm.
And so and by the way, the same people who think the pastor has no business telling them what to do in their home are often
The ones.
people that turn around and want to tell the pastor exactly how to do things. And
Yeah.
so the boundary goes both directions on
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Boundaries are important.
They are important. And again, I think that hopefully the context of all this gives a clarity that within the home, I should have complete openness.
Yes.
But around the home is where the protection
And
ought to be put.
I think boundaries protect relationships.
Hmm.
The proper boundaries protect my relationship with my children. Proper boundaries protect my relationship with extended family.
Mhm.
Proper boundaries protect my relationship with church family, friends,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah, but proper boundaries are not just sometimes people perceive boundaries as their way of imposing control on others.
Right. And that's
And
not
that's
right.
not the right way.
No.
Proper boundaries are about the protection of my home, not the imposition of my home on
Mhm.
others. It's almost like that whole thing that kind of happened over recent years with the whole pronouns thing, right? Well, these are my pronouns. And if you want to call yourself that, that's fine. That's your business. I disagree. There's only men and women, period. That's it. You can't make me agree with you, right? Now, you can choose not to be around me. That's your choice. But you can't make me agree with you. And so the boundary in that sense, if you think you need to be protected from me, is that you remove yourself, not that you remove me. You don't have a right to remove me. You can remove yourself. So the boundary is not about imposing your control on others. It's about withdrawing in some sense or
Mhm.
saying, hey, I'm not going to be around this. And I think there's some confusion in that because of
Yes.
our modern philosophies. The idea of boundaries is I get to tell you what you can and cannot do.
Mhm.
No, you get to remove yourself if you feel like you don't want to be around it.
And I think we're seeing that, I think, more and more in recent years within the family with adult children. I think we've heard that
Yeah.
more lately. Like the child has
The
grown up.
child's trying to control the parents.
Yes.
Boundaries are not about controlling others. They're about protecting yourself or your
Yeah.
family.
Yeah.
Right. And the problem is that with the parent thing, the canceling thing,
It,
is that there's a lot of that is they're saying, if you don't drop these standards, if you don't stop going to church, if you don't do this and this and this that I demand you do, then I'm not going to be around you. And that's not setting boundaries. That's trying to
manipulate.
exercise control through manipulation.
Yeah.
And so those aren't the same thing. And I think that you have to be aware of they're not the same thing.
Yeah.
And you can't allow people to
But they use
manipulate
the
you in that
term.
fashion.
The kids
They do
use the
use that
term. Well,
term.
I'm setting boundaries um from you because of this.
Yeah, but
But
boundaries,
that's not what that
no.
is.
Boundaries is, hey, I don't answer calls after 9 p.m. That doesn't mean you can't call. I can't stop you from calling. I just don't answer calls after 9 p.m.
Right.
If you call me after 9 p.m., I'm going to punish you. That's not boundaries. That I don't have a right to punish people. Boundaries don't mean right to punish. Boundaries are, yep, this is what I do. And if you're upset about my boundaries, that's between you and you, right? Because my boundaries are my boundaries.
Mhm.
That's a different question. I think many times in our day, boundaries have been turned into controlling and punishment behavior because I have boundaries, and it's like, well, you have your boundaries, but that's your business. Not
Right.
everybody, not everyone has to bow to your whim of what you want them to do and say because you have a boundary. That's not what boundaries are. That's
Right.
controlling, manipulating behavior.
Right. Boundaries are not weapons.
Correct. They're protections. They're defensive, not offensive.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. So.
All right. Well, I hope that helps. And those are just our thoughts. And if you disagree, then you're just wrong. That's all there is to it. But no, if you would, though, like, share, and subscribe, even if you didn't like what we said. All right. And comment, right?
Yes.
And give us, give us feedback on, any thoughts that you have. If you have disagreements with us, it's fine. We might agree or we might disagree with your comments, but it's okay. We won't bash you and make fun of you or anything like that
No.
because You have a right to your opinion, and so that's a reality. I do think that it's important that you understand the distinction of
Mhm.
boundaries in that
Yeah,
fashion. Yeah.
that's true.
So anyway, you can reach out to us at
Carter's, the number 4, hope@gmail.com.
and
Life and Godliness on Facebook
yes,
or Apple Podcast or
Spotify,
Spotify or even YouTube.
YouTube. Yep. And so please like, share, and subscribe and comment and all of that good stuff.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, next podcast. Well, next week we're going to be in
Nicaragua.
Nicaragua. We're going to try and record from Nicaragua. Okay.
Let's see.
So the next one is handling rejection.
Yes.
That'll be exciting.